Well, Tim Schmidt is president and founder of the U.S. Concealed Carry Association. He says more states are allowing permitless gun carry, and he's here to chat with us about that. Tim, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
It is my pleasure. Yeah, this seems to be a trend here. How many states are allowing you? And for people who don't know, I mean, it basically says you don't need to get the government's permission. You've got the Constitution's permission to keep and bear arms. You can carry a gun if you want to.
Exactly. The neat thing is that Missouri, the 11th state, just passed what I refer to as constitutional carry. Now, there's 11 states in our great country that, like you said, don't require you to beg the government for permission to exercise what I consider a natural born right.
Yeah. So it's the 11th state, huh?
That's correct. Yep. Yeah, Missouri just passed their constitutional carry about 3 weeks ago, and believe it or not, the liberals always predict that there's going to be blood in the streets, and of course, it's just the opposite. The criminals now they don't know who they should fear.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, with like Missouri and these other states, there still are restrictions. I mean, you can't carry a gun while you're drinking and things like this, right?
Of course, yeah. The common sense restrictions still apply. You can't obviously break laws, and carrying a gun while you're drinking is certainly one of those. Of course, there's still lots of restrictions in terms of you can't carry guns into schools, into church. Well, sometimes churches, government buildings, and the ironic thing is that those gun-free zones. Well, that's where all the mass shootings occur.
Yeah, it looks like they could figure this out after a while. I mean, the criminals are targeting the soft targets.
Exactly, and that's why one of the things I always love to point out is that these whole gun-free zones, they simply don't work, and that's exactly what they do. Is ultimately they create a giant group of defenseless people. And honestly, if I'm a crook, if I'm a criminal, and I want to do some damage, that's exactly where I'm going to go. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah. All right. So 11, and every state right now, am I right, has some sort of carry law on the books, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yep. Every state has some sort of concealed carry legislation. Now, there's at least probably 12 or 13 states that have what I refer to as shall issue, meaning the governing body that issues that permit, they have complete authority to just say, no, I'm not going to give you a permit. So you're essentially in that position of begging for the right to exercise your right. And whereas I think 37 states now have what I refer to as shall issue, which just means if you go through the process, you will get your permit.
All right. So you want to see this expanded? I mean, where you just, I mean, anybody can carry. I guess it's still, though, you have to be over 21. Is that the deal?
That's correct. Yeah, every state's slightly different, but most states require you to be 21. Quite frankly, I think it should be 18. I think if a person is old enough to serve their country in the military, you should be able to carry a gun for self-defense. I have a daughter that's going to be 18 very soon, and God dang it, I want her to be able to defend herself. Yeah.
Well, that's exactly. It makes sense. I mean, if you can carry a gun in the Army, why can't you carry a gun when you're as a private citizen? Where did this get started, Tim? All this constitutional carry thing.
The constitutional carry movement, I guess you can call it, really started about 4 years ago. Vermont's always had constitutional carry. Alaska switched over. Arizona started, and the neat thing that happened was there, of course, when the legislative bodies in those states started to go through that process, of course, the anti-gunners were just up in arms about, oh, this is going to be horrible, but in state after state that passed this legislation, absolutely nothing bad happened, and it's starting to get momentum, and I think it's fantastic because here's the bottom line: the ability to defend yourself is a natural born right. It's simply affirmed by the Second Amendment to the Constitution, and if you have to ask the government's permission to exercise that right, well, then it's not really a right.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. I mean, we don't. It's interesting that the founding fathers chose gun as the only inanimate object that they singled out for protection, and they must have thought it was very important.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And our founding fathers understood that free people have the ability to defend themselves, and that's why, like I said before, that's why they affirmed it with the Second Amendment to the Constitution.
What changes, you think, or are there going to be, if any, if Hillary Clinton becomes president?
Oh, Phil, I'll tell you what. If Hillary Clinton becomes president, I'm going to be scared to death. I mean, first of all, Hillary Clinton is going to appoint Supreme Court judges whose sole purpose, whose primary motive will be to completely unwind the Second Amendment, and that's going to be horrible. So, man, if your listeners are even on the fence, I urge them to please don't vote for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, she is no friend of the Second Amendment, is she?
Not at all. Not at all. It's such a huge issue that man, I hope people understand just how important that is.
All right. So, are there other states that are now considering this? Is in the hopper of this constitutional carry? We're up to 11 now.
Yeah, we're up to 11. There are a few states I think there's 6 states right now that have legislation introduced. Of course, they're at all different levels of the way their legislative process works. Wisconsin, the state that I live in, we attempted to pass a constitutional carry bill about 5 years ago. It didn't quite make it, but like we just talked about, the momentum's there, and it's such a positive thing because, man, when the criminals don't know who's carrying a gun, that deterrent effect is so powerful. And, the neat thing about concealed carry is that, everybody doesn't have to do it for everyone to get the benefit, right? If there's 3, 4, maybe 5% of people who make that decision to be responsibly armed, well, then the whole rest of the 95% of the population get that benefit. And that benefit is that the bad guys don't know who has a gun. If there's one language that the bad guys understand, they don't want to get shot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we see this all the time. I mean, the bad guys are picking out soft targets, and the only time they're stopped is with somebody who's carrying a gun. If nobody's carrying a gun, they aren't stopped until they want to stop.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So just a couple of weeks ago, that knife attack up in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
So what happened there? Well, the off-duty police officer, who just happens to be one of our USCCA instructors, which was so cool to find out, but he ignored the sign. He said, "No way, I'm carrying my gun in here, and I don't care. I'm going to break that law." And sure enough, thank goodness he did, because he saved countless lives that day.
Yeah, indeed he did. And this happens. It happens more than we know. The press doesn't like to report it. Even when they report the story, they'll talk about, he was stopped by so-and-so. They won't say that somebody was stopped by somebody else with a gun.
Yeah, let alone the press. Exactly. And additionally, the press they would never report that this guy actually had to break a law to be able to be in that situation.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, yeah, it's definitely it's a tough situation when you have to fight not only legislators but the press.
Well, there's a piece in the Washington Times from a couple of days ago by Dave Boyer. More states allowing permitless gun carry, embracing self-defense as a natural-born right. We have a link to that at philvalentine.com. And, of course, our expert is Tim Schmidt, president and founder of the U.S. Concealed Carry Association. If they want to join your organization, Tim, what's your web address?
Yeah, the easiest place to go is just USCCA.com. And, we have literally hundreds of free articles, downloads, reciprocity tools. It's a great place just to get started and figure out where you're at on your journey to become that responsibly armed citizen. So I really invite your listeners to check it out. There's lots of free resources. It's a great tool.
All right. Tim Schmidt, U.S. Concealed Carry Association. Appreciate it very much, Tim.
Thanks, Phil.